WrestleMania is not the biggest story that we're going to be talking about today. Instead, we are going to bring in our own Brandon Thurston from WrestleNomics, because tonight it looks like everyone is acknowledging one person, and that is reporter Alex Sherman with CNBC, the man who has, as you can see at the top of Alex Sherman's Twitter, has acknowledged that
he has stolen the show.
He has stolen the show at WrestleMania on WWE's big weekend.
Not since Rick Steamboat and Randy Savage has someone stolen the show at WrestleMania, such as Alex Sherman of CNBC has this afternoon.
So I'm just going to read a portion from Alex Sherman's report, this over at CNBC that came out this afternoon. And his report states that Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Entertainment is in advanced talks to be sold to Ari Emanuel's Endeavor Group, the parent company of UFC, according to people familiar with the matter. A deal could be announced as soon as Monday. UFC and WWE are expected to form a new publicly traded company as part of the agreement, according to the people who declined to be named due to the confidential nature of the discussions. Endeavor is slated to own 51% of the new combat sports and entertainment company, while WWE shareholders would get 49%, according to the people. The Endeavor deal gives WWE an enterprise value of $9.3 billion, they said. Emanuel, a media executive, is expected to act as chief executive of both Endeavor and the new company. McMahon, likewise, is expected to be executive chairman, while Endeavor president Mark Shapiro will also work in the same role at the new company. Dana White will remain as president of UFC, while WWE CEO Nick Khan will serve as president of the wrestling business. So those are kind of the overarching thoughts. There have been subsequent stories from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal that have essentially reported the same thing. I think one of them had stated they're expecting it this week, the other Monday. So it is very imminent, it would appear, Brandon, that this will be coming down. And I think that this is, when we were looking at the potential buyers, I think that Endeavor you could make a lot of arguments for, but this was one that I think at the same time you had kind of taken the public stance of Ari Emanuel that this was not something they were so much kicking the tires at, when they must have been, obviously.
Ari Emanuel made it clear that they weren't going to take on more debt. Mm-hmm. And what we're learning here, for those of us not familiar with the reverse Morse trust, which I don't think was the finish of the match tonight, the main event tonight, but doing a reverse Morse trust will allow Endeavor somehow to minimize their debt. This is very complicated, not something I'm prepared to explain in detail, and feel like I'm explaining it reliably. But basically, Endeavor in 2016 bought UFC, right? They bought it for, what was it, $5 billion at the time?
It was about $4 billion.
Anyway, They bought it for a lot of money, and they're still paying down that debt. What they propose to do here, if this comes to fruition, is to pull UFC out of Endeavor and leave behind Endeavor the streaming company, the talent agency, professional bull riding, whatever else goes along with Endeavor. Take UFC out of it and put UFC together with WWE. In that process, they would be able to separate some of their debt. If they do a reverse Morris trust where Endeavor takes 51% of the new company, that is UFC and WWE together, they can do it tax-free. So we have reports in here in the CNBC article about the valuations that UFC has, $12 billion, WWE $9 billion, which is way over what the stock market would indicate. Brandon Ross has tweeted, and I trust that he knows what he's talking about, that those valuations don't really matter. The market, when this becomes a publicly traded company, assuming that it does, the market will determine what the market value of this new company is. And these numbers that we see here won't matter as much. What does matter is that it's 51% Endeavor, 49% WWE. So we'll see what happens. There's a lot of questions, including what happens to Vince's preferred shares and his voting power and all that, but we'll see.
Yeah, there's obviously like so many questions to this. And, you know, in a nutshell, again, not an expert either when it comes to a reverse Morris trust that we're all going to be navigating here. Essentially, this is a pretty brilliant tax strategy, essentially, that it can actually alleviate some of Endeavor's debt, which we can get into more. But sort of just the big picture of all of this, Brandon, I mean, presuming that this goes through, and it seems this is only a question of if and not, or sorry, of when and not if, like this is obviously a transformative deal for both the UFC and WWE. And when you look at it, I mean, this, as we had stated, Endeavor has this experience now of running the UFC for 6.5 years. And there could be a lot of synergy here with a company like a WWE. The fact that Nick Khan is attached to this deal. Vince McMahon seems that, I mean, he continues to just amaze me at how he has played all of this from last summer to this comeback, swooping in back to his executive chairman role. And in essence, like, we don't know what exactly his day-to-day duties will be, but from these reports, like, it would seem like he will be the number 2 guy underneath Ari Emanuel in this newly formed company.
Yeah, I guess we could ask Alex Sherman, but my reading of the article is that the newly formed company will be run by Ari Emanuel, who we see on the screen there. He would be the chief officer of the new company as well as the remaining Endeavor company. He would run it along with the current president of Endeavor, Mark Shapiro, and Vince McMahon would be the executive chairman of the new UFC WWE company, is how I'm reading the article on CNBC. And then Dana White would continue to run UFC. He would be the chief officer of UFC, which is a subsidiary of this new company. And Nick Khan would be the president of WWE. So it puts Vince McMahon on the same level, I suppose, as Mark Shapiro and to some extent Ari Emanuel.
And so does this mean Vince would theoretically be in charge of the UFC above Dana?
I guess he would be above Dana, is how I read it, yeah.
Wow.
I don't know that he would have a lot to do with UFC, but yeah, he would.
Whatever executive chairman might mean in this instance, right?
It still remains to be seen, like, what kind of power Vince McMahon is going to have. Obviously, when you're looking at something of a purchase of this amount, the immediate assumption is that there is going to be a lot of redundancy between these companies. And when you're taking on such a gigantic cost, like as we lived through with the UFC being purchased by Endeavor, like, they went through the UFC and there were tons of cuts. There were people there that were assumed to have lifetime jobs that no longer had lifetime jobs. And that is one of the things we looked at here, is that of one of these media companies buying WWE, you would have that. That was one of the thoughts with the Saudi investment fund, is that, listen, they have no infrastructure to run such a company, that you would think you would want to keep that WWE system in place. Again, that's just one of hundreds of questions that you would associate with this, but it will be a completely different company under this, and there will be some redundancy for sure when you're merging these.
To some extent, if you're taking UFC out of Endeavor, maybe there's a lot of services that UFC would no longer have access to, since it's being pulled out of Endeavor, that might minimize the redundancies. Nonetheless, I think there still will be, which means layoffs. Something else that I've had explained to me tonight is that because this is an all-stock deal, employees who have restricted stock units, those may end up vesting immediately upon this deal being complete. So basically, if you have stock awards that you have to wait until you can cash them out, they may cash out sooner than expected. So that might happen. We could, people have been asking me, and I've been saying we could see an 8K filing as early as tomorrow morning before the stock market opens, but I have no sense of how fast this is going to happen. The CNBC article says as early as Monday, so as early as tomorrow. Interesting too that they're doing this deal before TV rights are done, which is kind of what certainly when the Disneys and the Comcasts were in this conversation about who might acquire WWE. The assumption was that a company transaction or company sale would happen first, and then WWE would go on and do its renewals for Raw and SmackDown. This is a company, Endeavor, that's merging with WWE, and they don't have networks of their own that they're going to put Raw and SmackDown on, obviously. So they're going to presumably together. This is something that, the analysts have talked about. Oh, wow, what a dream team it would be if you had Ari Emanuel and Nick Khan to go and shop the TV rights. And that should result in a better deal, if anything, for Raw and SmackDown, as well as UFC. So
the ramifications of, a possible merger between WWE and UFC are so immense. Obviously, workers' rights and the topic of unionization is something that's brought up often when it comes to both of these things. How would a major conglomerate of the two biggest entities in combat sports, what would that mean for, WWE's definitions of independent contractors or whatever the UFC defines its fighters as?
I would think we could talk to Lucas Middlebrook about it as we have recently. I would think until workers try to do something about it, nothing's going to change, or unless there's some sort of class action lawsuit. I know that there's the Kung Lee lawsuit that has been ongoing for years. I don't know that that's going to resolve in a major difference for workers, but it does put together two companies that have a lot in common in that respect, in that they have workers, talent who are perhaps misclassified. I would say in the case of WWE, which I understand a lot better, clearly misclassified, and no union. And there's the big controversy around UFC fighters. If you compare them to a lot of other pro sports, they're getting a very small percentage of the revenue. And similar for WWE, we could get into a larger debate, though, about whether that's appropriate or not.
Yeah, and we will try to relay any notes that come out of the press conference tonight, in particular Paul Levesque, which is one of many people you would look at as, very, very interesting to see what his role is going to be. And even preceding the sale, listen, Vince McMahon was there in LA over the weekend. It sounded like, he was a bit more vocal over this weekend. And certainly there is that assumption of where Vince McMahon is going to land in terms of day to day with WWE and post WrestleMania. What kind of involvement will he have? And with this sale, ultimately where Paul Levesque lands.
Even when it comes to the ethics of the company going forward, obviously, I mean, people are rightfully maybe very critical of where Dana White and the UFC stands there, but Ari Emanuel has famously protested against the Saudi deal, giving money back after making a deal. Now, how does this affect WWE's relationship with Saudi Arabia going forward?
I mean, John, does UFC do business with the Saudi government though still?
Not with the Saudi government, but in Abu Dhabi, at one point, the Abu Dhabi-based Flash Entertainment actually had a minority stake in the UFC that ended up being bought after the Endeavor sale. But
there's certainly nothing like a UFC show where they go to Saudi Arabia and get millions
not to
of
Saudi
dollars.
Arabia, no, no. So it's a worthwhile question, and it's a huge amount of revenue for WWE. And you're looking at something that I don't think they're going to be looking at any way to, use a moral compass to cut off revenue. I would think that would go uninterrupted, but it's a worthwhile question because Ari Emanuel was sort of an outlier in that whole Jamal Khashoggi fallout, where this guy put his money where his mouth is. And if you read, I think it was a New Yorker profile on him, was somewhat fearful of his life. He had bodyguards around him during this time, that it was, there was concern back in 2018, 2019, when that was sort of at its peak in terms of this being a concern that he actually took action with. In terms of just in hindsight, Brandon, do you go and look back at any of Nick Khan's appearances? Do they read any differently to you now? Do you think that it was almost, do you see this as any kind of tie-in with sort of a much more public front that Nick Khan was taking, just in terms of, we looked at a lot of these media appearances as sort of just dressing up the company, going into its biggest show. But you have to imagine that this sale, it was a matter of just crossing T's and dotting I's.
Yeah, I would think, we had the report on CNBC with David Faber earlier in the week where he talked about robust interest. Who knows what his sourcing was on it, but it appears to have, I don't know if it was because something was about to happen with Endeavor and that was information that he got a hold of, but there looks to be credibility to that. And it wasn't just pure hype as I suspected it might be. It looks like, this is probably going to happen. And, maybe something even happened, at the stadium where people were having conversations. I've asked some people who I knew were there and might have ran into people like potential suitors and people like that, and I didn't hear that there was strong Endeavor presence. It's not like I heard that Ari Emanuel was there talking to Nick Khan or something. So, but who knows? Maybe they're
this had to be the dominant topic of the night among the the key personnel that Nick Khan had mentioned, like, we're going to be there this weekend, and the idea of, talking to their incumbents, like, obviously this is, it's breaking on the, within hours of their biggest money show in history. So it's, the timing of all of this, it does make a whole lot of sense. And I noted it earlier today, but it very much draws me back to UFC 200, which was the biggest show in UFC's history in terms of its promotion. And coming out of that, it was just like that was imminent, that the sale was coming, and it just came days after that big event in Las Vegas as well.
And it's something else we could see coming out of this. If UFC and WWE do end up being a merged company, we could see weekends where there's a Saturday UFC fight and a Sunday WWE event, perhaps even in the same venue or something like that. So that's something that makes a lot of sense.
There's a ton of synergy when it comes to who they're bringing out for these tryouts, and you have the Performance Center and the Performance Institute. I mean, there's a lot that you can glean from. And I think, honestly, the idea of Ari Emanuel and Nick Khan being together, I think that's going to excite a lot of people on Wall Street. Just the idea of these, not just the next set of television deals for WWE, but when UFC's deals come around, like, you have Nick Khan in your house that might be the guy that is out there shopping UFC television deals on top of it. I think that is going to certainly raise a lot of interest just on both ends of the company.
Yeah.
But
and UFC's deal with ESPN will expire in 2025, I understand.
Yes, that's
I looked that up today.
Is not that far away that they have. And when you look at their involvement with ESPN Plus, like, they have been a huge impact on that streaming service on top of it. Mm-hmm. So at this point, I guess we're just waiting, and there could be a brand new WWE as of Monday, and we very well may be chatting with you at some point on Monday, Brandon. I think that this is just, it would seem very likely that Monday this could be breaking.
Yeah, I mean, I've said before, I expected there to be maybe some kind of bidding process like we saw for Manchester United, but that's not the way this is looking. So I might get an email. Those of us who have subscribed to the email alerts on W's investor relations website might get an email tomorrow morning, or maybe later in the day on Monday. We'll see, and we'll find out what we learn.
There's I just wanted to plug, WrestleNomics on YouTube. There's a great chat right now with Brandon and MJ from NJ, who talked about this as it broke earlier today. So I encourage everybody to go and check that out.
Yeah, please do.
And Brandon, we will, any thoughts on the main event outcome tonight of WrestleMania?
I was shocked. I thought for sure Cody was winning. Paul Levesque is spitting out numbers. I'm trying to read the closed captioning right now. But no, I predicted all of the winners ahead of time. I went through each match. I was correct on every one of them. I correctly predicted the winner of every match of this year's WrestleMania, except for the last match.
Here's one note we can end on. So Andrew Thompson texting me this. So Nick Hausman asked Paul Heyman and Roman Reigns about the WWE sale report. Reigns didn't give much of an answer, but Heyman said, quote, that he has a problem with starting things at press conferences.
Was that
very nice?
Kind of a clever answer there from Paul Heyman. So very smart on his part, I guess. Brandon, thanks a lot for staying up late with us. And maybe we will be chatting with you on Monday when if I have to send out the WrestleNomics signal.
I think I have some busy days ahead of me. Talk to you next time.
Thanks a lot, Brandon.
Bye.
So there we have it. That is the latest. There's not a whole lot more that we can go into. Obviously, this is a massive story that appears just imminent, that it will be breaking. Wade, just some of your overall thoughts, just the news and the fact that it is Endeavor that looks to be the one that is going to be purchasing the company.
Well, I think for a lot of wrestling fans and maybe a lot of wrestlers that are currently employed by the WWE, this is a bit of a relief, knowing that, the potential and at one point the strong, overwhelming favorite for a purchaser would have been the public investment fund from Saudi Arabia. So in that sense, this
depends who you are. I would never say that, a sale is a relief. I understand what you're saying, but
compared to the I guess the idea of it, yeah, a lot of people could potentially lose their jobs. after this. Yes.
I would also wonder like how many would have that aversion, that it was owned by something that maybe would be hands off and you just run the company as is. I mean, you can't assume everyone has that sort of moral standpoint of the ownership and such, but it's the unknown. You never want to be going into something that you don't know the outcome of, and nobody can be predicting what this new company will look like in 18 months. Like it's certainly it's going to be massive changes. Like it is literally the changing of a company. It's creating a whole new company that will be the umbrella of WWE and UFC underneath.
Yeah. But hey man, our whole lives we've had one owner, one person in control of the WWE, and that was Vince McMahon. And that's not going to be the case. I mean, he's still going to have a great deal of power, but he's not going to be the one at the top now. So I'm very curious, ethically, how does this company change? Its attachment to the UFC really more than doubles its size, and does it legitimize professional wrestling in a different way? USADA testing, things like the wellness policy, like do these things somehow interact with each other? And just how will this affect professional wrestling as a whole? Will it give it added legitimization and credibility that it didn't have before? Will it put a bigger microscope on it? Or will it just shelter itself, with the protection of a bigger company?
It's a great question. Like, to me, the idea would not be to just keep these two entities separate and there's no crossover in terms of promotion, in terms of resources. And inevitably, like, you're going to have staffs that are going to be in charge of, there is going to be some redundancy that always comes with these types of sales, where there will be people that will very likely lose jobs as a result of this. Like, that is the reality of giant purchases like this.
And of course, one of the big topics that maybe, is of interest to our audience is, well, what happens with the pay-per-view model?
Dude, I cannot tell you how many, that was the first thing when I got comments.
How does this affect me? Am I going to have to pay more money for these shows?
First and foremost, like, until that deal is up, that's a Peacock decision. Now, it is something that Nick Khan flat out said we would be open to it, but also put out the hypothetical if we were offered 5X. I don't think it's just a game changer that instantly they snap their fingers. And like, you have to remember that, yeah, you would love for every one of your pay-per-view events to generate X amount of dollars on top of what you are, but you have now conditioned an audience going back to 2014 that you're either getting these shows for free or at most topping out at $9.99 for a month. And it is that the best direction? Like, you are not the UFC, and it is a different mentality.
I would say a lot of the reaction and maybe a lot of our hesitancy is coming off of the initial reaction to some news like this. But AEW gets away with it, and that's professional wrestling, and it's dealing very much with the same audience. If WWE tonight wanted to charge, I don't know, $50, $60.
Listen, I've never said that. I, from the very beginning, didn't think WrestleMania should have been lumped in with the network. I understand why they did it, to get the network off the ground. But to me, that is the one show that, you're right, like, tonight's show would have done really well on pay-per-view. And I know from a fan perspective, you don't want to hear that you could throw a $60 price tag on this. But the reality is, WrestleMania is the event. You could do that. You would get some friction, but ultimately, I think that you would, especially if it was, hey, $75 for 2 nights of WrestleMania, I think most people would look at that as, okay, it's not what it was before, but in the end, are you going to buy it? You'd lose some people. You would. But ultimately, it would be a big generator, I feel, on pay-per-view. I can't say the other pay-per-views, and that would include a Royal Rumble at this point. I don't know if you would go beyond that, but I think we're getting ahead of ourselves because they are only in year 3 of this 5-year deal with Peacock at this point. We have had some tremendous WrestleMania coverage all week long at the Post Wrestling Cafe. Interviews with Brandon Thurston, Dave Meltzer, Speedball Mike Bailey, Mania previews. We had lots of Mania discussion all week long, and it will continue post-Mania. We will be back later this week with a special edition of Rewind Away covering CM Punk's interview on the art of wrestling from November of 2014. We're going to look back almost 9 years removed from a very pivotal interview that was the focus of a lawsuit years later. So we are going to go through that entire interview this Thursday. It's a special Thursday edition of the Rewind Away series. And if you sign up, it's $6 to get you in the door, access to all of our bonus shows and a month's worth of content, and access to 127 editions of Rewind Away and all of our archives, from Drive to Survive to interviews with Oscar-nominated documentarians. We have it all on the Post.
MCU later, and if you have to catch up on a lot of the WrestleMania week coverage, we did reviews of GCW's Bloodsport, the Mark Hitchcock Memorial, Super Card of Honor from Ring of Honor, of course. So postwrestlingcafe.com, video.postwrestling.com. We appreciate your support. Take that, Michael Cole.
That's it.
Come on.
Get your tickets now to the Post Wrestling Cafe. And for the others, they're like $6. These guys aren't worth that. You can just subscribe to the YouTube channel free of charge